Boker Tov. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the panel discussion honoring Reporters Sans Frontières, or known as RSF, on the occasion of the organization receiving the 2019 Dan David Prize. The International Dan David Prizes are awarded by the Dan David Foundation in cooperation with Tel Aviv University. The awards cover three time dimensions: the past, the present, and the future. The RSF received the award in the present category. RSF is a Paris-based independent NGO founded in 1985. Its bureaus in 10 cities including Brussels, Washington, Berlin, Tunis, Rio de Janeiro, and Stockholm, and its network of correspondents in 130 countries give it the ability to mobilize support, challenge governments, and wield influence on the ground and where media and internet standards and legislation are drafted. RSF's motto is that freedom of expression and information will always be the world's most important freedom. If journalists were not free to report the facts, denounce abuses, and alert the public, how would we resist problems such as children soldiers, torture of defending women's rights, or preserve our environment? In some countries, torturers stop their atrocious deeds as soon as they are mentioned in the media. In others, corrupt politicians abandon their illegal habits when investigative journalists publish compromising details about their activities. Still elsewhere, massacres are prevented when the international media focuses its cameras on such events. RSF has distinguished itself in the protest during the Beijing Olympics, in Africa by creating the only independent radio station broadcasting in Eritrea, in Haiti by creating a media support center after the 2010 earthquake, and more recently, in Syria by providing training to journalists and bloggers. Every day, RSF issues press releases and reports in several languages about the state of freedom of information throughout the world and how it is being violated. Its statements in the international media increase public awareness and influence leaders regarding both individual cases and general issues. RSF has received numerous prestigious awards from social, political, media, and academic organizations. And now, the latest award, the 2019 Dan David Prize, that recognizes its achievements that shape and enrich society today. Each year, RSF publishes its World Press Freedom Index as an evaluation and advocacy tool. Recent years have seen a marked increase in government reactions to the index, including greater attention they pay to freedom of information. The index is also increasingly used by bodies such as the UN Refugee Agency and the World Bank in determining the allocation of developmental aid. So joining us this morning are four distinguished individuals. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome Monsieur Christophe Deloire, Secretary General of RSF. Congratulations to you and the RSF for receiving this esteemed award. Monsieur Deloire is a journalist, author, and publisher. From 2008 to 2012, he was head of the Centre de Formation des Journalistes, the Paris Training Center for Journalists. Since 2012, he has been serving as Director General of RSF. Justice Dalia Dorner retired from the Israeli Supreme Court in 2004 after sitting on the court for 11 years. Since 2006, she has been serving as president of the Israeli Press Council and has taught courses on human rights at several institutions of higher learning. She has been conferred Doctor Honoris Causa by Weizmann Institute of Science and Ben Gurion University, and she just told me that next week she will be conferred one more time by the University of Haifa. Aluf Ben works for Haaretz, an independent daily considered by many as the New York Times of Israel. Formerly an investigative reporter and diplomatic and political commentator, he has been with Haaretz since 1989 in a variety of roles, culminating in his appointment as editor-in-chief in 2011. Finally, Efrat Peres Lachter is a news reporter correspondent currently with Israel's Channel 12 TV, where she is part of the Friday evening news magazine team. She has done significant investigative journalism and covered events in several world hotspots, including Iraq, Africa, and China. And we take special pride in the fact that Efrat is a graduate of our own Department of Communication here at Tel Aviv University. Now to our discussion. There is a Hebrew expression, makom tov ba'emtza, a good place in the middle, that typically connotes something fairly good, not extreme in any direction. While Israel is considered among leading nations on several fronts, its ranking by the RSF World Press Index during the past 5 years has reigned between 87 and 101 among 180 countries. This is definitely not such a good place in the middle. Here is what the 2019 report said about Israel, ranking last year in 88th place. The report is titled Corruption, Military Censorship, and Self-Censorship. And now I will quote from the report. The Israeli media are free to be outspoken, which is rare in the Middle East. Nonetheless, despite the existence of independent media, journalists are subjected to military censorship, orders banning coverage of certain subjects, private sector lawsuits designed to gag them, and open hostility from members of the government. The Israeli parliament has begun considering a proposed amendment under which recording or disseminating photos or video of serving Israeli soldiers with a demonstrable aim of undermining the spirit of IDF soldiers and residents of, of Israel, or intending to harm state security, would be punishable by 5 to 10 years in prison. Because of self-censorship, there is little or no coverage of the reality of life in the Palestinian territories. Foreign freelancers often have difficulties in obtaining or renewing accreditation. The Israel Defense Forces often violates the rights of Palestinian journalists, especially when they are covering demonstrations in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. 2 Palestinian journalists were killed by IDF snipers and dozens were wounded while covering the March of Return protests in the Gaza Strip in 2018. Under Israel's system of administrative detention, Palestinian journalists can be held indefinitely without formal charges and without notification of a lawyer, and on the grounds that they are inciting violence or cooperating with terrorist organizations. The IDF have harassed or closed many Palestinian media outlets in recent years for allegedly inciting violence. Unquote. So, as social scientists studying communication, 4 central questions come to mind. First, how is the World Press Freedom Index created, thereby placing Israel in the 88th place? How are the various qualitative elements converted into quantitative rankings? This question I will mainly ask Monsieur Deloire to relate to. In your view, second, in your view, is the RSF citation about Israel a fair representation of Israeli democracy and its media? This question will be to all 4 panelists. The third question, how would you describe the Israeli situation in a comparative framework, taking other countries into account? And I would refer this question first to Efrat Lachter. And finally, what are the prospects for improving Israel's ranking in the index in the foreseeable future? And that again for all panelists. So, without further ado, Monsieur Deloire, could you possibly respond to the question, how is the World Press Freedom Index created? And give us an explanation, thereby placing Israel in the 88th place last year.
Thank you so much for your...
Yeah.
Okay, do I have to start again? So thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Akiba Cohen, for your introduction. I'm really delighted and honored to be with such distinguished panelists and to be with you this morning in the Tel Aviv University. I will start, if you allow me, to pay a tribute to the memory of Dan David and to the family, to Gabriela, to Ariel, for their commitment, for their general commitment beyond journalism, and of course for the award we got, which is for us very important in very difficult times for journalism, and especially, of course, for quality journalism. And just before I answer your question, and I will answer your question, just I would like to explain that the challenges we face are much more complicated than they used to be. I would say that the world of yesterday was more simple. Not so good, but more simple. We had to face despotic regimes with classical violations of press freedom. They put journalists in jail. They threatened them. Other groups killed journalists. It didn't disappear. We could believe that thanks to the new technologies, these classical violations of the rights of journalists would disappear. In fact, right now, there are in the whole world around 350 journalists in jail. Last year, 80 journalists were killed in the course of their jobs, just for investigating, reporting. Not only in war zones, but also in countries that are supposed to be in peace. In Mexico, in Turkey, the most famous example is, of course, Jamal Khashoggi, who was dismantled in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. But every year, journalists are dismantled, dismembered in Mexico because they investigate crime. And even in Europe, and Europe is supposed to be the continent where the press freedom is at the highest level, journalists were killed in the past 2 years. Investigative journalists, they had this in common. They investigated. Daphne Caruana Galizia in Malta, she investigated tax evasion, corruption, and then in Slovakia, Jan Kuciak. And Jan Kuciak never went to war zones, even never met with dangerous sources. He was a data journalist. He just compared reports of the European Union, reports in his country, Slovakia, made analysis, and he was killed for this by mafia guys. So the situation is worsening. These are the classical violations, and there is an increase. I would call it the visible prisons. And then you have another level, the invisible prisons. No blood, no bars, but constraints on information, control of news and information through money, technology, or laws that can seem to be soft. There is no identified victim. You cannot say this journalist was a victim, but our right to information is violated. When oligarchs, and when I say oligarchs, I do not mean Russian oligarchs, but all over the world, in India, in Turkey, in Latin America, go buying in the media to use it for their influence, or just to serve the interests of the presidents of their countries. That's the case, for instance, even in Turkey. Turkey has been a laboratory for the reduction, the abolishment of pluralism through many, many ways. Even just friends of Erdogan bought media outlets and totally changed the editorial lines. It wasn't for their interests, because of course, when you change the editorial line, the audience doesn't follow, so the media outlets disappear. These are the invisible prisons. And then we have another topic, which is even bigger, which is that we now live in a sort of, on a global scale, we live in a news and information jungle. Safeguards were established in 1948. This was an important year for different reasons. 1948, because it was also the year of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But the safeguards for news and information were established on a national level through constitutional guarantees, media laws, invisible for the public but with many virtues, and self-regulation. And those guarantees are swept away, those safeguards. We have to rebuild it. So that's the challenges we have to face. Now, the World Press Freedom Index. I could have three types of answer. I will give only one. The first type of answer is about the methodology. I could tell you very long how we work. We have a questionnaire, an online questionnaire in 20 languages with a qualitative methodology, specialists of all the countries that answer 100 questions, and we produce the index. I could have a psychological answer. I have to say that, and I'm sorry to say this, but that in many, many countries, people say, oh, our country should be better ranked. I guess even in Finland, they are second this year, they believe that they should be first. And last, first one is Norway. And 3 weeks ago, I was in one of the worst countries on earth. Really, there is a blackout on media, and the journalist said to me, oh, we are free in our country. There are around 40 journalists in jail, propaganda, etc., but they believe they should be much higher. So this is the second answer. The third answer is about reality, and that, I guess this is the answer you would like to have. If you compare Israel with other countries, in fact, things happen in these countries that do not happen in some other countries. It doesn't happen in all the countries that you have billboards on the roads with the faces of journalists, saying they will not decide. Of course they will not decide. This is not their role. But this is an intimidation. This doesn't happen in all the countries that you have so tough speeches against journalists. It happens in some countries, we can say this, even in the US, but not in all the countries. It is not true in all countries that you cannot, as a journalist, and beyond this as a citizen, go to the zone just across the border to visit it and report about it and know what happens there. I, of course, hint at the fact that journalists are not allowed to go together. It doesn't happen in all the countries that you have such corruption or attempts, cases, with clear negotiations. And with also, it happened, clear violations of editorial independence. So I could have a longer list. And yes, we do believe that this 88th ranking is deserved, I would say, legitimate. And of course, we would like this to be much better. But as you said, as compared with other countries in the region, this is better. But is this enough? I'm not sure.
Okay, why don't we open this up now for responses by the other panelists? the general question of, you think that this is a representative picture of the situation here in Israel? Who wants to begin? Oof. תפתח את הכפתור.
Bob. Good morning again. Thanks for the Dan David Prize and the university for inviting us to talk about this important topic. Well, I can't really compare us with the 87th place or 86th, but clearly you touched upon some issues that are representative of our problems here. Military censorship. Military censorship has been a constraint on Israeli media forever, since the British Mandate. And its main effect on us is twofold. First of all is stuff that you don't even bother to cover or to investigate because you say it's never going to pass censorship. The main issue, however, that censorship is really leaning upon us in our daily lives is not so much coverage of what happens in the territories. The problem of coverage of Israeli occupation is not by the censorship, is not even by the government or by the courts or by libel laws or anything like that. It's because I believe that the Israeli public, the Hebrew reading, the Hebrew watching, the Hebrew listening public doesn't want to be bothered by it, doesn't want to hear about it, and most of the media barely reports about it, most of the time. This is not because of government intervention. It's not as if the government is encouraging it. The government doesn't like to talk about it either. Government ministers don't give briefings about what we did to extend the occupation this morning. And even when Israel reaches ceasefire agreements with Hamas in Gaza, we have to watch the announcement by Hamas because the Israeli government doesn't feel that it has to report it to its own citizens. But most of the problem of censorship is what I call ambiguities. Stuff that the Israeli government doesn't like to acknowledge or to take responsibility for, and imposes it upon the media by forcing us to quote foreign sources. Two main issues, historically, Israel's nuclear program. But this is not so much covered because not much is happening there, I guess, news-wise. It's mostly about ancient history. That, we still have to argue with them about stories about stuff that happened in 1967. The other issue that is more relevant and prevalent is cross-border operations. When we hear that, like last night, or the night before that mysterious bombings were heard in Damascus, and the Syrian government reports that its forces intercepted Israeli missiles. There's no responsibility. No Israeli official takes responsibility for that. And the Israeli media is not allowed to publish that this was an Israeli attack, only quoting foreign sources or the Syrian government or whoever. Only when something gets wrong or when, for some reason, a senior politician or military officer likes to take credit for our successful operations against the Syrians, against the Iranians in Syria, whatever, then out of the sudden, no censorship. And when you complain about that, you say, okay, you can be as ambiguous as you want, but why do you force us to play that role? They say, well, because of the existence of censorship, whatever is published in Israel from Israeli sources amounts to an official declaration. So we are presumably independent, but on issues of matters of national security, we are supposed to be organs of the government. And that's the main issue. I must say, however, that I made my career fighting censorship, and the most successful case limiting the scope of censorship in Israel, the Schnitzer case, is based on a story of mine in a Supreme Court ruling of 30 years ago. Since then, the Supreme Court failed to intervene, and in all cases when the media appealed to the Supreme Court against rulings of the military censorship, in all cases with no exception, the justices told the journalists to step back and said, if you don't want us to rewrite the Schnitzer case in a more limited way, back off. So there is no real legal protection for the media if you argue with the censorship. You have to negotiate with them. The only caveat in this picture came to me in this position. First of all, as editor, you see things differently than as a writer who wants to publish everything. As an editor, you have different responsibilities. And 5 years ago, when the Snowden case exploded in the US and Britain, and I witnessed the extent by which my American and British colleagues censored themselves in publishing the Snowden material because they were afraid of being prosecuted for harming national security. In Israel, once you play by the censorship rules, you have zero liability. So I don't have to be afraid to be prosecuted for harming national security if I submit stuff to censorship. I think the broader problem that we're facing here is threefold. First of all, a general attitude by the Netanyahu government against what the Prime Minister calls the media, by which he means any media that is critical of him. I don't think that he includes the pro-Netanyahu media as part of the media, but the media is the enemy of the state. The media wants to overthrow the government. The media does that. The media says that. When with Trump in power and the use of the cliché fake news about everything critical is prevalent here, just as in the United States. So that's one attitude. It's not necessarily a problem. Look at the New York Times. They won over 1 million new digital subscribers because of that. We're not as successful, but the more natural position for journalists and for a media organization is the opposition. So this is an issue, but it's not necessarily a problem. The bigger problem is the efforts and the declared policy of the newly elected government that is yet to be formed. But I think there's a wide agreement among its participants in the coalition that the independence of the Israeli Supreme Court should be limited. And since freedom of the press in Israel is only enshrined, was created and enshrined in Supreme Court rulings, any undermining of the independence of the Supreme Court would harm freedom of the press. And last but not least, there's an attitude in the mainstream media, which they call shutting the door to extremists from both right and left, and trying not to be too critical and not to make their viewers and readers angry. In times of social networks, you don't want to be on either side. You want to play it safe, a bad place in the middle, to use your word. And we feel that every time that we publish something that is away from the mainstream, mostly in the opinion section, we get criticized all over the place. And I wonder why are these colleagues, competitors of ours, trying so hard to limit the discussion rather than to use it to enrich the debate. But they don't want to do that. And the fourth point, last but not least, the impact of social networks, of internet giants on freedom of the press is the biggest challenge to all of us, everywhere in the world. The fact that they are eating up the economic base of news organizations, turning more and more news organizations into kind of not exactly NGO, but loss-making enterprises. And that affects its editorial independence. The best way to achieve editorial independence was in the old days the classifieds. Millions of advertisers, none of them could have any direct influence on you. Now advertising is disappearing, moving to Google and Facebook. More and more of the dissemination of information goes to Google and Facebook, and they have their own rules, and they growingly tell you what to say and what not to say. They're even encouraged to do that because they were blamed for the rise of Donald Trump. And I think this is the major issue that all of us would have to deal with, regardless if you're 88 or 87 or even number 1 or 2. And by the way, in Norway is the one place where the local media, the Schibsted, which is the biggest media group there, was able to compete with Google and Facebook. They're not as strong in Norway as they are in the rest of the world. Just point
I
of
think there's no better point in shifting now to Justice Dorner. To remind you, former Justice of the Supreme Court, currently the President of the Israeli Press Council. So I wonder how you would like to respond
Excellent.
to these
Thank
points.
Aluf Ben told you the day-to-day problems of the journalist. I want to speak from a legal point of view. Now, Israel is an open society. We enjoy an independent judiciary, strong Supreme Court, and a vibrant and pluralistic press. Nevertheless, it's not easy to be a journalist in this country. We have no what you call First Amendment in the United States, and nor a strong belief in free press. I'll speak about the role of the public opinion. It's very important. Then, our freedom of press is not protected by a constitution. Our democracy is weak. We have no enough checks and balances. We have basic laws, but they are not entrenched, so that our governing majority has the power to change the rules of the game and to take control of democratic institutions, the media, the judiciary, civil society. Now, this power was not used because we are not governed by one party, but by a coalition. And all the years, the coalition consisted at least of one liberal party. But times are fickle. Nowadays, and there were several, in my view, several laws adopted by the late Knesset who chip away for our democracy. So, why is because we need a constitution. We need an entrenchment of the basic laws. And if we have not this, there is a weakness. And if I speak of freedom of speech, what happens with the journalist? There are no laws against the freedom of speech, still. I'm not much worried about military censorship, because you can always apply, you are not happy with the result, but you can always apply to our court, independent court, and it decides what it decides. The main issue is that we don't let, I hope we do our best to use this power for political reasons, military reasons, security, you know, it's in our country, I think in every country, sacred. People die, there is a war, security. Court must take it into account. But it's a question of public opinion. Nowadays, as times are fickle, and the members of the ruling majority compete with each other, attacking the press. Netanyahu, his attacks are not only against the media in general, and specifically journalists, and really it endangers them, because public opinion, as I told you, is not a strong belief in free press. Everyone wants free speech for himself, but not for his opponent, and we know these things. So that's not only personal revenge. I think the idea is to, by these attacks, to control public discourse, reporting of the news, and the judiciary. There are several ideas, if I say judiciary in general, specifically the Supreme Court. And, if these attacks influence the public opinion, I think it was George Orwell who wrote in the preface of his book, Animal Farm, that the danger to free thought and speech is not the direct interference of the government, but public opinion. So brings that inconvenient facts will be kept dark and unpopular ideas will be dismissed by self-censorship. And I'm afraid that there is, I look at it, there is a certain censorship, self-censorship in this country. You spoke about it. And it's also for economic reasons, because there is also this problem. So all said, what can we do? The most important thing in my country at least, but because journalists are not in jail, thank God, still, is public opinion. And these attacks of a popular prime minister, they influence the public opinion. And we must fight against it. We, in the Press Council, see our main job to try to explain to our public the importance of the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. They won't be always the majority. They will also be one day the minority. And the freedom of press protects the country and the freedom of every one of us. And I'm an optimist, I must be at my age, so let us hope for the best.
Would you comment both on the general report of the RSF, but given your expertise in the international scene, perhaps you want to elaborate on how you see Israel vis-a-vis other countries ranked, I guess, below the 88th place in the index.
Right. So also thank you for inviting me here. It's really a great honor to be here, and I admire your work. And so I read your report, and I was checking to see the countries I've been to. So maybe what I'm going to say is a little biased because, as I found out, I worked at 11 countries that you find is difficult, and such as Iraq, Turkey, Ethiopia, Uganda, and 3 countries you find in a very serious condition, which is Syria, Egypt, and China. So this is my point of view. And I would like to share 3 stories that will give examples to those things. So the first one is 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was covering the war against ISIS in Mosul in Iraq. And I got there, my job was to be embedded to the Kurdish forces. Now, I've been embedding to Israel forces during the war, and I can say it's a whole different story. Because in Israel, when you're embedded in a war, first of all, the forces have a sort of responsibility to your safety. Now, as a journalist, I don't want to be limited. I don't want other people to tell me where I can go or I cannot go. But on the other hand, it's pretty good that you have someone who says, listen, I am responsible, you're in my car, I'm taking you from place to place, but I will also give you information about what's going on. Okay, so in Israel, the Israeli forces, they give you information, numbers, the progress of the war. You have to check everything. Not everything is accurate. I have a lot of criticism about the IDF spokesman unit, but they are trustworthy most of the time in the field, I'm saying. When I went to Mosul, there was nothing like it. Well, there was instructions at first. When you come to the field, they tell you, okay, so this battle, like this specific battle, is going to take 2 hours. We're going to crush ISIS. We'll be in and out. You're going to see it's going to be very easy. And once you go to the field, it takes 12 hours, 14 hours of heavy clashes, and no one is telling you what's really going on. the opposite. They will not tell you how many casualties, how many wounded. They hide this information from you. They think that's part of their PR, right? Saying that everything is okay and the battle is going well. But as a journalist, first, it makes the risk you're taking even greater. I think that's part of the reason why so many journalists were killed in Syria and Iraq, and I can really see that happening. Because you walk into the field, you have no idea what's going on, they're not really telling you, and you might get into very dangerous places. So that's first story. My second story is from China. I was there a month ago. I was actually doing a story which is... well, I wouldn't say positive, but it's not such a bad story for the Chinese government. I did a story about the one-child policy that changed into two-child policy, and I came to a maternity hospital to speak with women who gave birth to their second child. And I was asking them, why are you having a second child? And how is it for you? And I was amazed, as an Israeli journalist, that everyone at first gave me the same answer. We're doing it because the government asked us to have a second child. Now, I don't believe any woman has children just because the government asked her to, right? There must be some other reason. And after really getting into knowing the people, and off camera you will hear different reasons. But people in China really cannot speak their mind. And it's not people that are involved in political action. It's women that just gave birth and still are so... They're so aware of what the government think of them and how much they have to be careful that it was amazing to me. Also, I was filming outside on the street, this interviewing. Now, I had all the certificates, all the paper. I was allowed to go there. I had a visa as a journalist coming to China, everything. I thought I'm fixed, no problems. And like 3 minutes into the interview, someone comes and he has no uniform, no badge. He's coming like a civilian, start taking photos of us, of the car, of my interviewee. And she got really scared. And I said, why are you worried? This guy, what can he do to us, right? But she said, no, we have to get out of here. Now in Israel, that can never happen. There's no way a civilian will come to you in the middle of an interview and scare you so badly. I don't know, maybe in the West Bank, but inside of Israel, I mean, the West Bank is a different story. But inside of Israel, that's something that can never happen. And last and third story, 4 years ago, I went to Uganda to interview the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni. And also, I did a story about illegal arm trade, which is a sensitive thing, right? Illegal arm trade is always a sensitive thing. It was a story about arms being sold from Israel to Uganda, but ending up in the Central African Republic, which is a country under international embargo. So being there after interviewing the president, I felt pretty safe. I was working with a local Ugandan reporter who told me that his life is in danger for working on this kind of issues. But I said, okay, but I just met the president, and the president is God in this country, so I'm good. Pretty soon, I start understanding that I'm being followed everywhere, all the time, and the people who were following us didn't want to be unmentioned. They wanted us to feel their presence everywhere we went. And as I getting into the depth of this story and asking more people and meeting arm dealers, which are not the nicest people, actually, I even got a threat that said, for $50, we can have a car that will drive your car off a cliff. So you maybe want to stop asking questions around here. So I had to leave sooner than I thought. Again, this is something that could never happen here in Israel. I did stories about Israel #1 criminal, Amir Mulner, and his influence on the city mayor of Ramat Gan, which is something that, and the police came out really bad from my report. And yet I know that if I was threatened, I could have gone to the police and have protection. No matter what I report about them, I would still feel safe in my house. So we have a lot of problems, like Aluf mentioned, and Justice Dorner, and like you did too. And I'm really happy there is someone that keeps checking on us and making us, and telling us we should improve, because we should improve. But in general, I feel very, very lucky. I'm a journalist in Israel and not in other places. And I feel like I'm totally free here to do my job and get to the truth of things. Thank you.
Mr. Delois, I'm very surprised that you are so up to date about the billboards with the pictures of the journalists in our just prior to our recent election. So you must be getting information on a very updated basis. Having heard the three participants just now, has your view changed in any way? How do you react to what they have just said? And again, I'm not by any means trying to defend our own situation here, which is not very simple at all.
Of course, I always learn and want to learn, and I think the positions were quite different, if I understood well. First, I think it would be, in any case, it wouldn't come to our mind to compare Israel and China. Really not, or even with Iraq. And I have to say that China is not ranked 87th, but 176 on 7th, or 7th. So, one of the 4 worst countries on earth. So, yeah, it has nothing to do. But I would like to react to something, in fact, to try to mix your two. About the fact that one problem that all the democracies have now in common, which is the platforms, Facebook, Google, and it's related to the question of the checks and balances. Yes. Because what happens in that our public square, I could say the square of the village, where we exchange information, ideas, etc., in democracies, was managed with checks and balances. The rules were established by parliaments, by the constitution, by the people itself when they adopted constitutions. And now, this square of the village is managed by platforms. And it's a huge change of paradigm. The people who create the norms, the architectures of choices, who say where we can put the chairs, the tables, who can sit where. For some topics remain our parliaments, but for a lot of topics are now two, I will quote, two very different guys. On one side, Mark Zuckerberg, when he changes his algorithm, he changes the laws. Code is law, you know this motto. And on the other side, it will be in the future, Xi Jinping. Because China has also its platforms. I do not compare Mark Zuckerberg and Xi Jinping, it would make sense, but they go, Weibo and other platforms, they go to other markets, and this is a huge risk for democracies. Because can we accept that Mark Zuckerberg or Xi Jinping have the power to say what we can see, what we cannot see? To introduce a bias. The difference between democracies and other regimes is that if you go to Iran, there is a huge bias in the public sphere. If you go to China, there is a huge bias in the public sphere. And when Weibo, the Chinese platforms, work overseas, they keep this bias. In democracies, normally there is no political or ideological or religious bias. So how do we secure those safeguards? How do we impose them now to platforms? This is a key question. Otherwise, our democracies will be like, it reminds me like a painting of the famous Spanish painter Goya. You see two people You can see this painting in the Prado Museum in Madrid. You see two guys, they beat each other with weapons. They are obsessed with the other guy. They want to beat him. They do not see that they have a common enemy. And the common enemy is a quicksand. And both of them are sinking into the quicksand. And that's a bit what our democracies can do. And so we have to avoid that there are quicksands. And for this, we have to establish a new system of safeguards adapted to the globalized and digitalized information and communication space. And that's what we work on with the Initiative on Information and Democracy that has been endorsed by 12 heads of government and state last November, and which will be in the agenda of the next G7 summit in Biarritz, France, next August. So we will try to create a sort of framework with safeguards to avoid that, to defend people, journalists, knowing that in any case they will lose the game because the rules of the game are against them.
You know, I understood that several years ago, one thing that is totally banned on Facebook is nudity. And we published a story about an exhibition by Micha Baram, Israel's, I think, most famed war photographer. And the picture we put on our weekly magazine and on our Haaretz Facebook feed, was of a reservist soldier taking a shower from a jerry can on the other side of the Suez Canal. You could see some nudity if you looked very hard. A reader complained to Facebook. Immediately, they shut your page for 24 hours. And then you have to find someone who knows someone in Facebook, because there is no court of appeals in Facebook. So eventually, we were allowed to run again. But clearly, you're not going to test the system again and its rules, which are known. They publish them. And that told me that the best way to protect editorial freedom is to have your own distribution system. Because if you want to rely on it's cheaper and easier to rely on the algorithm of someone else. But then, as you said, the algorithm is changed. No one tells you about it. No one explains it to you. If you're not able to sell your product to your customers, you're not going to survive, or you're not going to be free. You can only publish, I don't know, about the Eurovision contest and not very critical stuff there as well. And I think this is critical. Economic independence and especially independent distribution are the key to editorial freedom. No less than, governments, do-good governments protecting us from Google and Facebook. They're not as strong, and as Justice Dorner said, they can change from very democratic pro-media governments to the other side. That can happen too. We see it in some places.
What can I say? I come back. Comparing us to China and Uganda, I think it's a better place. But I want us to compare us to Finland.
That's what I brought.
Finland will be excellent.
I didn't work in
In
Norway.
Norway are the best. Well, I thought that Finland, they were offended, no? They were only second. And we want, even our right-wing government...
One interruption. In psychology, you talk about just noticeable differences. Now, the rankings are 1, 2, 3. The question is there a noticeable difference between the first and the second and the second and the third? Probably not that much. Who's number 2 after Norway?
Finland.
Finland. Now, what's the difference between the two?
No, it's very. I have to say it's very difficult to. But what happened is that Finland was first.
It must be number 2.
Yeah.
Who's number 2 to Usain Bolt? I don't know either.
No. It's sometimes
It's
difficult
by
to rank.
milliseconds.
But what happened is Finland was first for 6 years, 7 years, and then there were interventions by the Prime Minister of Finland on Waijali.
Wow.
which is the Finnish public TV. He tried to interfere with the content, and that's why, but Wiley totally resisted. But just for one phone call, it was a big case in Finland, and that's why 2 years ago they came to the fourth place and then came back to the second. So sometimes things happen. And in Sweden, for instance, as compared to Norway, you have a lot of trolls who intimidate journalists. There is more hate speech against journalists than in Norway. So these countries are not perfect, and but as compared, we can consider that there is a sort of Nordic model.
Okay, I just want to make my point. Now, what can we do? I mean, your report is important for my country because even our right-wing government wants a nice face. They want to be a democracy, the best one, the villa in, okay. So they, as Orwell said, inconvenient facts will be kept dark. So we won't use, let us say, the word occupation. It's not nice. So there is a power of such reports because we want to be beautiful. We want to be nice. My problem, our problem, is public opinion. They don't like free speech. I mean, they like, generally. I think the last survey of our Israel Democratic Institute showed that only 31% trust the media. And among the Arabs, more trust the media about our Arab citizens than the Jewish citizens. 31%. It's a very low percent. And therefore, I'm worried because we get along with the laws if they won't change it. Because as I explained it, our lack of constitution gives the power to change the rules of the game. So let us hope for the best. I must be an optimist. But I am very much for public opinion. We in the press council, we try, we go to the periphery, we meet with people, just small towns, explain to people the importance of the freedom of press. What you have, the power that we have got, that we have got and you have got in your report is that Israel wants to be a democracy, even the right-wing government. It gets offended if you call them that we are a weak democracy. That's an offense. I explain why, but it is hard to get an understanding. Why? We have free elections. We have, I don't know how many parties. How many have we got? Enough. I thought that you, as an editor of Haaretz, knows. I lost the count. And really, we are also a vibrant society, and the government is criticized freely. We must understand it. It's a problem with the territories. That's another matter, because it's a political matter. I won't touch it. I am still a justice, even retired. But returning back to the freedom of press, without which there is no democracy and really no free elections. If you can't criticize freely, then you have not got free elections. I return to the public opinion. Every one of us must do something. Also in the academia, you have your students, you must educate them. I myself teach, understand that not only their ideas and their opinions count, also the opinion of the other side, the opponent.
Is there anything realistic, not in theory, but something realistic that could be done in Israeli society to educate people, to try and make them more aware of the needed democracy that is under stress in this country right now? Is there something that you see can be done? Or is it a lost case?
Look, I don't think that anything is a lost case. First of all, we have a very changed media landscape in the past decade or 2 decades than there used to be. You know, where when I grew up, there was a single TV channel in black and white with Chaim Yavin, the anchor, telling us what the news was, and that was it. And everything else grew out of that lineup. You know, to this day, the lineup in all newscasts in Israel begins with the conflict, the external conflict, and then the political conflict, and then, you know, down to economics, police news, culture, and the weather forecast. This could have been different. The centrality of the conflict was decided by someone, I don't know, back then, and to this day, nobody challenges that order of priorities. But now we have a much more vibrant media landscape because we have media channels for the ultra-Orthodox, for the national religious, for left-wingers, for right-wingers. It's more democratic than it used to be. And there are people in Israel who yearn to return to what we call the campfire model of one anchor telling us everything we should know and what the news was. I think this is wrong. Number two, look, when you read the Prime Minister's criminal cases, and you notice that he got into trouble for media manipulation, which means that as much as you know, people don't trust the media, people don't like the media, politicians say nasty things about the media. If it's not sidelined, if the Prime Minister was risking going to prison in order to manipulate the coverage in the 2 main news sites in Israel, which says something about the centrality of media, despite all the eulogies that we hear day and night about it. Is it perfect? It's not, but I think it's today more open than it used to be. And when I hear about education, I hear the old campfire once again with, you know, the authority. Give us back the authority. Don't challenge it. I think that it should be challenged, and I think it's far more pluralistic today. Even if a lot of that pluralism is against whatever I believe in or whatever I would like the country to look like, I think it's more democratic.
That's because you're a true Democrat. There are many who would not.
Yeah, but the balancing act is that, you know, in Haaretz we get the same amount of criticism from left-wingers, the supposedly more liberal, as we get from right-wingers about how did you dare publish that piece? How can you dare publish?
But most of the right-wingers don't read your newspaper.
Well, even if they don't read it, you know, if you look at Israel Hayom, the main right-wing media in Israel, they have a daily column which they call the Daily Troll, which is 90% of the time quoting from Haaretz op-eds and tweets by Haaretz writers and so on. So, you know, you can get by being criticized elsewhere, you get your message. So I don't think that that people don't notice what we do. But yes, the general attitude in Israel is we don't want to shut down the other opinion, censor it. People don't like balance. They couldn't care less about balance. All they want is that the idea or the opinion that they dislike wouldn't be there. And this is what we're facing. And I think that you should be as annoying to this side of the aisle as to the other side of the aisle, and I think this is what makes you relevant, and that's why I don't like the campfire, and I don't like the idea that we don't like the extremists from both right and left. Just not rock the boat.
We have some time that we can open up for comments, brief comments or questions from our audience. Would you? Microphone.
Yeah, hi. If I can sort of ask a broader question. Adel David. Hi. So you correctly pointed out the danger of Mike Zuckerberg or Xi Jinping, manipulating their algorithm or changing the rules and deciding what we can see and what we can't see. So my question is this: so how does the balancing act work? Because on the other hand, Facebook and other platforms have been blamed for providing a platform to fake news, to propaganda, essentially, which is then used to destroy the authority and the trust in the mainstream media, and is used by the same populists who want to silence the mainstream media and the free media. And a lot of the sort of attempts to control what can be seen and what cannot be seen on these platforms like Facebook is a reaction to that spread of fake news and propaganda. So where do you draw the line, and how do you draw the line between, it's kind of a catch-22, because on one hand you can't censor, you don't want Facebook to decide what we can't see, but then if they don't decide, you get this flood of propaganda and fake news. So what do you do? Thank you.
Well, it's a part of freedom of speech, and there is the law. That's what I told about checks and balances. There is forbidden speech. Incitement is forbidden by law. So if the law doesn't forbid, you have the right, if I don't like it, I don't like it. If really it harms the society, then there is the parliament, and it takes into account that it's against a very important human right, freedom of speech. So we must be very careful forbidding speech. But there is forbidden speech, and that's the world. Not campfire, the problem is, but education, that I mean, the understanding that the other side has also the right to talk what he wants to. I'm afraid of self-censorship, because not every journalist writes in Haaretz, and people look for work. And I feel there is self-censorship. I hear also friends talking about, see, I don't want to go into this matter. It will not be good. Why not? They don't feel free. And that's checks and balances.
I will add something. I think that the legal systems are not totally adapted anymore to the new challenges. Because the question is not only, are you allowed to say things or not? What are the exceptions, the legitimate exceptions, according to the international standards to freedom of expression? It is that the algorithms, they can really amplify things. And it is even proven by, for instance, MIT studies, that they amplify extremist contents or false contents. So it creates new distortions of competition, unfair competition, by false information as compared with verified information. And this is totally new. And just, I think we cannot just say that the algorithm is Facebook is just protected by the freedom of expression of Mark Zuckerberg. Or that we just impose him to be a sort of editor-in-chief. We say you are responsible, as the editor-in-chief is responsible. It would be very dangerous because he would be like the editor-in-chief of the world, could have his editorial line. We cannot give him this power. And I'm not opposed to the man himself. The question is not a person. And I do not totally agree with the question you asked is absolutely key. There's something that I differ on, is that this is not just a consequence, you said that the fact that Zuckerberg has a power to make decisions is a consequence of the willingness of citizens to have him fight fake news. Or did I understand well?
Part of the conversation.
Yes, but
Because of fake news, they say, well, you have to.
yes, no, but in fact, he has the power. Whatever we want. Today, he has the power. And we have our own contradiction, and I totally agree with you. And sometimes the same individuals have really contradictions. We say to him, you have to be responsible not to censor. And if you take off the content, this is censorship. You are really bad. On the contrary, if he doesn't censor, we say, oh, you circulate hate speech. You should be responsible. So, as citizens, we have to take our responsibilities and to be able to tell the principles that he has to comply with. We have to base his responsibility of something, and this work on the principles has not been done. And the rules were lost. We have to find the new rules. The history of democracy is an history of rules. Journalism is composed by rights and duties. There are some rules. That's what makes us useful for societies. And even I will question, as we are in a university, I will question the question. I think that journalists can be considered as a fourth estate, but their real social function is to be trusted third parties for societies in a very pluralistic way. Thanks to our work, to our methods, to our normally independence, to our compliance with ethical principles, normally this leads to free, independent, and trustworthy news and information in a perfect world. Of course, there are a little differences sometimes. So how do we defend this? We have to find new ways, because just to give you an example of totally new questions. You know Alexa and Siri, the two artificial intelligence systems. Is it just the freedom of expression of the guys who produce it? Should Alexa and Siri be allowed, according to freedom of expression principles, to answer the question, is my prime minister or my president or my king honest? For whom should I vote? Today there is no rule. So we could live in a world tomorrow when in our homes we have the same devices, and when we ask the question for whom should I vote, they will say it. And they will totally introduce biases. So we have to find ways to address those totally new questions. Never happened to have such questions to solve in the past decades.
I agree with you, and I think that commenting about Facebook, I think people today are learning that you can't trust what you read on Facebook the same way you can't trust that people are always in Thailand having a vacation there. They're also writing things that might be false. And I think that gives us a greater responsibility as journalists, because this is actually what we have to offer. What we have to offer is the fact that we verify what we publish, that you can trust our publication, that we do some fact checking, that we don't just put out there whatever there is without doing a serious research. So I actually think it might be a good thing for our profession. And we have to work harder. We have to prove ourselves to our audience and buy their trust every day, again and again. And I think that if you see in Israel, although I agree with Justice Durner, there is a lot of people that want to hear different opinions, But on the other hand, you see the rating is really high, and people are watching the news every night. I don't think they watch the news the same way in most countries, in this high rates. So I think people still trust journalists, even though they criticize them, and that only pushes us to work harder. And I also wanted to refer to something that was in the report. One of the things that I think hurt our ranking was the fact that there is administrative arrests in Israel, that Palestinian journalists are arrested. And I was thinking about it a lot, thinking how we can improve in that area, in that field. And thinking about a practical solution, I thought I might know 2 Palestinian journalists personally. We do not have connections with them. And maybe if there was a sort of a place, organization, NGO, something that would put us together in touch with them, and that's maybe something your organization can help build. If I had a connection with Palestinian journalists and I would know them on a personal base, I would know that if they were arrested, it's wrong. Now, I have a leverage on my government. I'm able to speak to the authorities and say, this guy, I know him. That's not right. He was arrested, and I will publish this, and I will put pressure on you to stop to set him free. So, I think maybe if we would put professionalism over nationalism in that point, that might be a very helpful solution, and that can also give us a better rank.
Yeah, but it's a problem for them because they are banned by their own professional societies from engaging with us because that is considered an act of normalization. And even our reporter Amira Haas was taken off stage when she spoke at the Birzeit University a couple of years ago because that was seen as an act of normalization. And no Arab journalist from Jordan or from Egypt or from the Palestinian Authority is able to give an interview, an on-the-record interview to any Hebrew media or any Israeli media because they would face boycott in their own societies. It's not as easy. It's not as if they are banging on our door to engage with us, and it's more of a problem for them. 2 points on Facebook. First of all, one person's hate speech is another person's freedom fight. It's not as easy to discern between them sometimes. And we have the case of the Israeli airport, Doreen Tatur, was convicted for incitement. And now she was acquitted of one count of incitement with her poem. But still the district court, the Court of Appeals upheld her conviction for two Facebook posts in which she praised jihad. Last point was the most brilliant marketing idea by Mark Zuckerberg after the Trump election was when they were criticized for being manipulated by the Russians and others and disseminating fake news. They said, okay, we'll outsource the kosher stamp of truth to external NGOs. They would check facts that were disseminated on Facebook and say if it's suspected fake news. Now, this is brilliant. Why? Because on one hand, you say, okay, I'm not responsible. I outsource the kosher stamp to the liberal NGOs. They could verify it. And then if they say that something is suspected as fake news, that's the traffic magnet, as traffic magnet as you could think of. Because if you see on your Facebook feed, this is suspected fake news, what are you going to do? Immediately click it, because it's a good fairy tale. So on one hand, you wash your hands off fake news, and you get all the income generated by fake news on your site. Win-win situation.
I think I can speak loud enough. You talked a lot about the social media. Of course, it's a major factor in nowadays. I wonder if you would perhaps comment on organizations like WikiLeaks or people like Snowden and their role and how they have changed or haven't changed.
No, please go. No,
No,
do you want to answer?
Okay. WikiLeaks, what can I do with them? We have no WikiLeaks. Still.
I think there are different WikiLeaks, because if you have a look on the history of WikiLeaks, there were really different periods, And we have different opinions on the different periods. We do not have at all the same conception or idea of what WikiLeaks did about the last US election and what WikiLeaks did when they gave material to journalists to investigate about what happened in Iraq, for instance. I think, of course, in democracies we have to find balances, and some secrets are legitimate, other ones are not. And we defended a lot Julian Assange when he was a source of journalists or acted as a journalist. We do not defend him on other behaviors. So I personally met with him a few times in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And we do consider that he should not be expelled to the US for his journalistic activities. And in fact, for the moment, I have to say that the reason that is alleged by the US authorities is about what he did at the beginning. So we do believe that it would be really a clear violation of press freedom if he would be expelled for these reasons, for his journalistic activities.
I'm going to do this thing that we do in academic conference when we ask a question, but really we just state our opinion. And I want just to continue Ariel's question. I think by now, 2 years after the Trump election, research showed that fake news is not that big a phenomena and really had very little impact, and that our fear of algorithms is maybe to extend, and I don't know, mania of fake news was a bit bigger. And what we do see is that user behavior drives this phenomena. For instance, we had a research in this election, and we saw that people believe fake news about candidates for this election, but also fake news that was not circulating in social media, but stories that we invented, because people want to believe no matter what. So, but I do think that Facebook is a bigger danger than we think, not about fake news that we worry so much, but mostly because, as Aluf said, it destroys the economic foundation of journalism and media organizations in a way that could not be restored. And what Facebook do by borrowing and taking content for free and limiting users from going to website of news organization and actually create profit for the things they do. They create content, and Facebook just take it away. And by doing so, destroys every business model you have and leaves us with nothing.
Well, there are several business models. One is selling digital subscriptions, which is the New York Times model, and then you have the sugar daddy, the Washington Post, Israel Hayom model. They exist. No, you have the richest man in the world buying the Washington Post. Well, he can survive the economic downturn. He could compete with Facebook, but we believe that he has other interests besides producing good journalism.
What do you want to do with it? Forbid it by law? I mean, there is the rule of the law, and it's. I always return to the question of checks and balances. But generally, if you forbid, let us say, publishing untruth, it's terrible, no? What is untruth? Lies. Forbidden to publish lies. I had one of the cases I heard, Jenin. The problem was there was a film and soldiers didn't like it because they weren't put there as nice guys. They said that were lies. And I told them, sorry, The history will tell what is the lie. For you, it is a lie. For the Palestinian, it's the truth. He tells the story of the Palestinian. But what can you do? Fake news, it can be very dangerous. I agree with you. The problem is, how do you decide to forbid something? It's a worldwide problem. It's not an easy problem. I don't think that this panel will find a solution. I'm afraid.
We really are at the point where we should close, but there's one more.
May I just answer to this question? In fact, there are two types of regulations. There's content regulations, the question of should we forbid or not forbid, and market regulation. And there is no market regulation. And before there was a sort of market regulation adapted to a sector, which in fact disappeared, because now there is direct competition between state propaganda, information sponsored by interest, advertising, quality journalism, rumors, etc. So how we find a way to solve it? And I continue, in fact, to answer to Ariel also. We also have disinformation campaigns, for instance. In the past elections in India, Mexico, etc., it went mostly through private emails, through WhatsApp, etc. And I will ask you the question. Does it remain freedom of expression when you send 3 million emails to people and the content does not depend on what you say, but on just the people who receive it? Does it has to comply with exactly the same principles? So, and all our regulations, they were based on distinctions that are now abolished. Public and private spaces, different media sectors, and even more, the distinction between human beings and artificial intelligence. So we have really to rethink it, I think. But if it's my last word, I will say that we could, of course, speak longer about the problems in Israel. I didn't speak about the Palestinian journalists who are targeted, and I have to say this, but you live in a country, and I have to say this, Gabriela and Ariel will not be in jail for awarding the prize about democracy. In China, they wouldn't be in the room, they would be in jail immediately, and this is not this type of country. And this is good news.
I think that we need to close at this point. Actually, the discussion is getting much more heated, but time is up. I'd like to thank our distinguished guests and once again to congratulate the organization for the award. Thank you to the prize. Thank you for coming. And who's going to get the prize next year?